Welcome to Marketing MASH, brought to you by themarketingscope.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Marketing Scope's Marketing MASH, our weekly show. I'm Eric Vidal. We have Daniel Newman, contributing writer for the Marketing Scope, Forbes entrepreneur, co-CEO of V3 Broad Suite. Shelly Kramer is joining us soon. Shelly needs no introduction in the civilized social media world, so I wouldn't even dare do it. But we have Brian Fonzo. Same goes for Brian pretty much. Brian works for V3 Broad Suite. He's a speaker, writer, podcaster, video guru. And today we have a special guest. Today we have Ed King, founder and CEO of Openprise. And Ed, maybe you can help me out, but Openprise is a platform or service to help with data hygiene. Is that correct?
Correct. We are a what we call a data automation tool, just because we don't kind of nicely fit into any of the existing, what you would say, the Gartner's standard definition of data tools. So we're a data automation tool that basically we're designed to help a non-technical business user. Somebody, for example, a lot of our customers are in marketing ops and sales ops, to be able to create their own data automation to automate tasks such as cleansing, correlation, segmentation, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, good. So, I mean, the topic of today is data-driven marketing, and I mean, let's dive in and start having some conversations. I have some questions I want to get started because, at the Marketing Scope, we're all about clean data, and it's not easy. It's a headache, and we're constantly trying to keep up the hygiene. And so, my questions are there some essential, 3 things or 5 essential things that you should be thinking about for your data-driven marketing and keeping your data clean?
Sure. Yeah. So of course, these days, marketing is turning from kind of the art into a hard data science, like everybody knows. And what we're seeing that, it doesn't matter what type of data project you look at, and marketing one's all the same. There's a kind of a standard 3 phases, right? There's the part about it's a collection, processing, and analysis. Collection, for most of the B2B folks that we work with, collection is fairly straightforward. The data is basically in your marketing automation platform, Marketo, Aliquot, and Salesforce. And the third step, which is the analysis part, it can get interesting. There's a lot of very nice tools out there these days in terms of basically your basic BI dashboards, and of course, all the hot stuff around predictive analytics, right? So a lot of good offerings there. So go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I thought that was it. Keep going. You're doing good.
So what's missing? What we find is either people intentionally don't want to deal with it because it's not as glamorous, or they just not as familiar with it. Is the middle step, which is the processing. Which, to put it simply, all these analytics capabilities, whether it's predictive or traditional BI, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't feed it clean data that's clean, normalized, and segmented, your output is just, you're going to get whatever garbage output you put in. And so what we're seeing is that we're working with customers to try and help them understand kind of the core capabilities they need to develop in-house in this processing area. This is where we're actually seeing people can kind of build up differentiating capabilities. Because if you think about the collection part and the analysis part, it's fairly commoditized in terms of, everybody's using the same platforms like Aliquot and Marketo. Everybody can have access to sense of BI capabilities. And so it's really hard for you to differentiate and gain kind of a marketing advantage compared to your competitors. Whereas processing, really, there's still a lot of art to it, and a lot of stuff you still have to do in-house. So we think that's one area that potentially, there's a lot of kind of, there's 5 things we usually tell people that you can develop as a kind of a core capabilities. And that's really around just, cleansing, normalization, the segmentation, and ability to turn unstructured data into structured data. And the last one is correlation.
So I got a couple other questions. I'll wait though. Daniel or Brian, if you have a question or a comment, please jump in.
I think I think you asked a great question. Eric, but I think you also have to back up a little bit and talk about the problem here. So data hygiene has become a really hot topic lately. Why? And it's primarily because of the velocity and volume by which data is being created, right? Data is being created, the structured data has been around forever. So, what Ed's been doing has been needed for a very, very long time. With the rapid proliferation of the internet, digital transformation, social, unstructured data is growing at just unprecedented rates, right? Anyone that's seen that illustration of 1 minute on the internet knows just how much data is created every minute that people have no idea what to do with. But I think it's really interesting is because, we work with clients all the time that have data. And what Ed's talking about is so interesting and important is data itself doesn't mean a lot. Everybody has collections of data, and data repositories are easy to create. It's not a problem anymore to get data. Companies have always had data. It's using data. And I think that's really why this data hygiene topic has become popular now. Is we have so much data, and as companies, very few of us use even a small percentage of it. You remember that old adage about, the average human uses 10% of their brain? Well, I would be surprised if most companies use 10% of their data.
Yeah,
and the problem is because we have no organization of it. So hygiene, right, Eric, you talked about it because you have, into the millions of emails from the inbound and demand gen business you run. It's not about collecting the emails. It's about keeping that email, keeping that information useful so that you could actually segment it out, target it out, and put interesting, useful information in front of those people. And I think that's a big, important thing to cover before we jump right into the actual act of data hygiene.
Correct. That's absolutely right. Again, you're absolutely right that people don't use only use a fraction of what they have, and partly because they can only use whatever part that is actually relatively clean. And most companies we work with, they really don't have much capabilities in house to do the processing part, and oftentimes they're finding out this kind of after the fact that hey, we would like to do this, and they fed all the data into it. Either this tools just can't handle it, or the results not what they're looking for. Right? One good example. So account-based marketing. Right now it's kind of a hot topic out there, right? A lot of folks try to do that. There's a number of solutions out there. And part of the one thing account-based marketing is supposed to do for you is try to help you analyze whether you have the proper amount of penetration at each one of the accounts, right? Who are the contacts you have with this opportunity, and what job level they are, what area you are, so you can know if you are calling up high enough, you have the right influencer, the budget owner, and all that. So how do you do that analysis if you don't know where all these contacts fitting in the organization? You didn't know what job function they're in. You didn't know what job level they're in. If you're selling a financial services package, you better be talking to the CFO or the VP of finance, right? So you got 20 contacts in that account. If you don't know whether they're executives and they're in finance, then you don't have a good idea where you are at all. And where's that data coming from? That data comes from people's job title for the most part. And then how do you then take that? If you think about job title, it's a perfect example of what Dan just mentioned. That's unstructured data. People call them anything they want. Even the same title, when you put in stuff like special characters, spelling errors, it becomes unstructured data. How do you take, for example, the title CFO and be able to tag that contact record as this is an executive in finance, right? That's just a very common example we see of how you can take the data you have from unstructured form to structured form and be able to use for segmentation and doing cool things like account-based marketing.
So what are some of the more common challenges you see when it comes to normalizing data? Because for me, not too long ago, with a lot of our enterprise accounts, we were looking at it, and just something as simple as IBM being spelled 40 different ways. Well, I mean, not 40, but 12. You know what I mean? And
it's more like 42.
Yeah. So what are some of those? What are some of the things that you come across that are common challenges that maybe the rest of us could get a quick FYI so we can keep our eyes open for that?
Sure. And whenever I answer this question, I like to talk about in kind of 5 different key areas. 3 of them what I would consider as the basic hygiene, and there's 2 kind of those more the advanced topics, right? So you always have to start with clean. Because if your data is not clean, really there's not a whole lot of things you can do. And when I say cleaning, I'm fairly specific. We're talking about data in the wrong format, typos, syntax here, right? For example, your sales guy's typing in a lead's email address, instead of putting .com, he putting a little comma instead, right? Now that email just became useless. And so that's a typical syntax here. And then, of course, people can. I lived in Massachusetts for 4 years. I still can't spell it. And people can't spell Tennessee, can't spell Mississippi. And those are just, all the things that can go wrong in terms of just the data being just bad. Now, so you can do that cleaning. That's all the things you can do. Then the next thing that people really need to do after you have clean data is normalization, right? Good example we see all the time, pretty much every one of our customers doing this, is, for example, normalizing state and country names, right? Instead of having people putting CA, California, Cal, Calif, and you try to run a revenue report by state, you have 300 pieces for the United States, right? We don't have 300 states. So how do you get that down to a normalized list, whether you prefer to use a 2-digit code for the state or the full name? So that's the normalization part. Once you have clean and normalized data, you're actually in pretty good shape. Most of your reports will look pretty good, and most of your process automation can do a pretty decent job without a lot airing out. Then actually the third step, which we're finding a lot of kind of more mature marketers trying to do, is segmentation, right? So if you've been running your Marketo Alibaba platform for a couple of years now, you've been capturing leads, you've been doing email marketing and nurturing campaigns, all that's great. What people are running into is that we cannot get more precise about what we do in terms of engagement and campaigning unless we can segment our database. And a great example is that we walked into a new customer the other day. First thing the marketing operation manager told me, he said, "Hey, guess what I did this morning? I sent out 500,000 emails." I'm like, whoa. So they have a Marketo database with 1.5 million leads, right? So she's new on the job. They started to do some engagement emails. And first thing she discovered is that, how do I build a list and define who to send it out to? Because the list is not segmented, she literally had to end up saying, okay, this will go out to everybody in the US. That's 500,000 people that just got a generic email that wasn't catered to specific job roles or job functions, right? Of course, you can imagine the unsubscribe rate on that type of campaign. So we see that's actually now the critical area where people need to start to segment their database so they can actually kind of move to what I would call like a marketing automation 2.0, enabled by kind of a well-segmented data by job title, by job function, by company size, by industry. The other two more advanced topics around unstructured data, turning unstructured data to structured data, like we talked about earlier, and eventually you want to start getting into correlation. That's where a lot of the kind of predictive analytics start to get into.
Well, I think some of the problems that's being discussed there, I think part of that is that we're doing kind of two things really badly. We're asking for data and we're bringing data in that has no use for what we can actually turn into action, right? I think we've always kind of gathered more than we really even need. And I understand the need to gather some stuff that you're not sure what might be useful. But I think also, especially from the marketing side, I think oftentimes marketing is either getting a dump of data, right, from different groups or different departments that is stuff that's not of value, right? And even the forms and things that a salesperson's adding to their CRM, where they would rather have their Twitter handle than their address and about 13 other things, yet we're still asking for the data that is this data that that is causing us to have, I'd say, a tough time clarifying, but at the same time, what is that data being actionable? So I guess from a client perspective, how much of it turns into they do the hygiene, they clean their data up, and then they go, crap, we asked for a bunch of useless stuff, and we didn't ask for a bunch of the stuff we probably should have.
Yeah, in terms, we actually don't see as much in terms of useless data, but you're definitely right that when marketer first got the ability to capture all that data with the marketing automation platform, and there's the kind of default thinking more is better, right? But then people start to figure out, wait a minute, if I put a sign-up form with 10 fields up there, nobody fills it out, right? So now there's this, so everybody knows you should keep your form as short as possible, right? Then of course, now you're going to the other extreme is that I can't ask for that much information. So how do I fill out the missing pieces, right? This is where, again, a lot of these ability to normalize the segment, being able to create information from whatever little you do have becomes extremely valuable going forward. In fact, had an interesting intellectual discussion with the CMO the other day that their form right now has 10 fields, and they have a pretty low sign-up rate they would like to improve. And this intellectual discussion got down to that. I made the bold claim that at this day and age, all you need is an email or a Twitter handle. And we can basically find out everything about that lead if you have the right tools and people doing research, right? So I would say right now its challenge is more on the other end, is that we don't get to have as much data initially, but how can we leverage that, get to what we need to support routing and segmentation? And actually most customers I talk to, they would love to have the too much data problem. It's really I don't have the right data, or I don't have enough data.
Well, let's talk about something else, analytics, because really nobody cares about data. Everybody cares about analytics. Data means nothing in its raw form, right? You can the one RU unit that can hold millions and millions of pieces of information. Brands are looking for a piece of info, whether that's something that's going to drive the needle of revenue up, customer retention, reduce churn, increase employee engagement, all kinds of things. That's why we do data. Okay. How do you suggest brands go from zero or very little utilization of data to starting a program to actually extract analytics that help them to improve the way they run their business? Much like we started with accounting softwares and CRMs, those have been like the two kind of consistent data use cases in businesses. But across the board, everything else, where are analytics opportunities and how can businesses get started with it?
Yeah, so Dan, you're absolutely right. Nobody cleans data just because they enjoy it. The output is the analytics, whether the traditional or the predictive. So when we see people try to tackle these problems, once they realize they have to do this, they don't like it, but they have to do it. I've been in the kind of the middleware IT area long enough to kind of see how people, at least traditionally on the IT side, not most necessarily on the marketing side, have failed when it comes to these data projects. So I usually give people a couple basic advice on how do you get started and how do you build up. First of all, is don't try to boil the ocean, right? This applies to a lot of things, but especially when it comes to data. Don't try to make your data perfect, because first thing you got to realize that your data will never be perfect. The moment you quote cleaned it, you made it perfect, the next second it's bad again. Right? So it's really about what is the best way to be in a better place than you are now. So do it incrementally, do small steps, right? Start with maybe just doing a little cleansing and normalization. If you're ready, then once you kind of get a hold of that to say, hey, my data is now maybe 50% better than it was last month, and we're out now at a place that we can potentially start doing a little bit of segmentation on top of it. We can now, for example, we have pretty decent job title data, so we can segment the leads, but maybe we don't have the industry information quite right yet, so we can't segment company yet. Do a little bit at a time, right? Improve your data one area at a time. Pick areas that really matters to you. For example, one of the B2B customers we have that is in the area selling online backup and data governance. Their entire new go-to-market strategy is basically based on company size. So for them, they're doing everything possible to make sure they get their data sent to a data validation service like Dun & Bradstreet to get a company industry and the size information correct in terms of number of employees and the annual revenue. Then they're using our tool to do the resegmentation. For example, Dun & Bradstreet give you 2,000 different industry names. Nobody I know works off 2,000 industries. You probably work off anywhere from 10 to 20 different target industries. So how do you remap that to the industry list that you have? What's your definition of a large enterprise? What is your definition of a SMB, right? How do you remap employee numbers and revenue numbers to those? So do these small things that really matters to you. Don't try to just go for perfection from day one. And the other thing we typically see people tripped up is that in kind of jumping in, trying to make things good, they do they do it manually, right? So one of the customers we engage with for a while, they literally have folks in India that cleans about 20,000 leads by hand on a monthly basis. That was okay for a while until one day they found out that their Marketo database has over 1 million leads in it, which means if you do that math, they'll never catch up, right? So it becomes basically a hole that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So I really encourage you to start thinking about automation from day one, even if you don't adopt it. Again, you don't have to build an ocean. Take on whatever little things you can do. Do just 1 or 2 things, automate it, get it out of the way, so you don't find out, 6 to 9 months down the road after you spend a bunch of money with a manual process, you can't scale and everything's kind of, for naught. Other thing is that depends on what your company is, how much resources you have, what kind of skill sets you have. Make sure whatever tools you have kind of match the skill sets you have, right? So if you have a pretty good sized IT organization that can support you, and you can go with more sophisticated tools, and that can solve a lot of complex problems you have, by all means, go down that path. But if you don't have techies on your team and your IT organization maybe even smaller than your marketing organization, go with something that's easier to use. May not be able to handle all the complex stuff you can even imagine, but again, something that you can implement tomorrow is better than something that you'll never be able to implement. And that's important, right? So for example, another customer who we're talking to, they just recently IPO'd. So they're flush with cash. So I literally asked them, I said, you can hire 10 analysts, can you? Why do you need a tool like Openprise? He's like, Ed, look around the room. He said, yeah, I got a budget, I can hire 10 people tomorrow. Problem is, if I can find anybody that even knows remotely how to write SQL and stand up a database, my engineering team is going to take those people. There's no way I can't find them, and I can't keep them. So in the room, we have his Salesforce admin, we have his Marketo admin, we have an analyst that kind of knows a little bit about SQL. He said, this is the team that has to deal with the data we have. So we need to find a tool that is suitable for people like us. And yes, I would love to have more people with just kick-ass SQL skills, but not going to happen, even with all the money we have.
So let's talk about something that I think a lot of the audience, especially like here on Blab and that the Marketing Scopes community, they want leads. And Eric, I'm going to flip it. I know that you're sort of the moderator here. I'm going to play moderator.
Co-moderator with you, Dan. Co-moderator.
Because demand gen is of interest. I can guarantee you of the 20 people watching right now and the 80 that have checked into this room, a lot of them are thinking about creating leads. So Ed's talked a lot about what you do with that data. You have it, but a lot of them are struggling with, how do I get that data? How am I compelling? Eric, you do this day in and day out. So once you've done this, what Ed does in Openprise is very important for a lot of companies, and I deal with them every day. They don't have, at least not sales lead data. And sales lead data is something companies are very, very hot on. So Eric, how would you tell a company that wants to get started with demand gen and lead creation, get started so they have that data that someday they could work with someone like Ed on?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what Ed said earlier. I mean, you want to start early. We started early, but in all honesty, as we started ramping up and growing, we got sloppy. And about 6 weeks back, we had to go back in and clean our data, and it took it. I mean, Ed, in all honesty, we had to reach out to Ed's company to help us with it. We couldn't do it ourselves, and that was 6-7 weeks ago. And guess what? It's starting to get dirty again. So, but just stay on top of it. So I think that the key message I would say is start early, stay on top of it, and look at and like you said, it's a lot about the analytics. For us, yeah, we look at the data, but we're looking at the analytics. For example, if these 172 people read this article or looked at this ebook, and they filled out a form and downloaded this ebook, they also might be interested in this. And so we're trying to provide content that's very segmented towards them, their title, their name, but also their behavior, what they've done. And so, I mean, it's starting early, I guess, is a key message. The other is some of the tools you use. We're fortunate. Our webcasting and virtual event tool, it tells us a lot of behavior. It tracks behavior. So we actually put that in those when we talk about a certain person in the database. If they've attended a virtual event or a webcast, we have certain columns on what they did during that webcast. So we understand these people are more interested in this, these people are more interested in that. And so certain topics like video or content marketing, or they're somebody who's very active or engaged, we have certain marks, because if somebody did 5 different things in a virtual event, we call them, they're an engaged person. They're someone who likes to collaborate maybe. And so we'll invite them to a certain, maybe a certain event that has a lot of collaboration.
Go one step back though, Eric. People want to actually get the people signed up. They want them to attend the event. So things are tired, right? White paper giveaways are tired. Ebook giveaways are tired. Attending our webinar, it's
harder and harder every time.
50 or 100 a day. It's getting harder. Demand gen marketers that want data, they want leads. You are a guy that actually offers like cost per lead programs. You do events and you have sponsors who are basically buying lead, not thought leadership. They are buying in for the lead opportunities that you create. How are you helping them get started? How does a company, a B2B or a B2C that really just wants to start a lead gen program, get started? I think Ed has all the answers of how to get it fixed once you add all those leads. But there's a lot of up and coming companies that don't know where to start.
So great question. I mean, it goes back to what Ed said. We try to go with a very simplistic form. The challenge is when we do a program, we can be simplistic, but when there's a sponsor involved, they never want it simplistic. They want several forms, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 different line items there. Or fields. So I think I would say getting started right away, I would leverage a partner, an outside vendor to come help you. Do a cost per lead program. So I did some consulting a while back, a little less than a year ago, for a couple of tech companies. And that was the recommendation I gave with them. They hadn't done any lead gen. They didn't have a lot of data. And so they had some people that were signed up for their newsletter / blog, and that was it. And it was a small number, very small. So I recommend going outside, because you can get a good amount of data on that lead, and you can get 100, 200 leads for a pretty decent price. And then you build on that, and you've built your pipeline. That's my little graphic there. You built the funnel, right? You've built the top of the funnel, and then you can work on that data, those leads. So I would actually go to an outside vendor, depending on, it goes, where does your audience live? If you're marketing to marketing people, maybe it's on the Marketing Scope. Maybe it's at Marketing Profs, ClickZ, somewhere like that. If you're marketing to the IT audience, you might want to reach out to one of the Ziff Davis sites or publications. But that's where I would start, is do a cost per lead or some kind of lead gen program with an outside vendor, and then build that list, and then work on those people, and then start doing programs off of those leads. That's kind of a long answer, but hopefully I got to it.
No, it's a good answer. I mean, I think that's the key, though, is, knowing your audiences. There is the data hygiene element of it, but there is also the data collection and data hygiene. Ed, and I hate to say it, and this is me as a writer, it's hard to write about because it's not really exciting, but it's actually extraordinarily important.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like I said, these half hours are great, and I think there's a lot of depth and information as we sort of wrap this thing back together. I guess we sort of started at the end, with Ed, and what he's talking about is really the end of when you've got data, you need to keep up with it. And I think you can't appreciate the importance of doing stuff to keep your data clean as you go. But at the same time, these kinds of programs, right? People come to our sites every day looking for not information necessarily how to keep their data clean. They realize that later. What they start out doing is saying, how do I get the data? And I think one of the important elements too, maybe there's a good kind of last thing to wrap up, and Ed, I'd love to get your take, and Eric and Brian as well, is what data do you think companies have that they're largely ignoring that they could be utilizing right now better than they are? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I can jump in on that one. So this actually ties back to the last question you asked Eric about, where the leads coming from, right? Years ago, when I ran marketing, one of the decisions we made was that we didn't have all the resources to chase after every incomplete lead and clean the data. So we took the stand that, and I know many of my friends did the same things, that we'll only collect quality leads. Like, for example, we had a form that was relatively long on our website because the thinking back then was hey, if the guy is only going to give me his Gmail address and some no company name information, I don't have the time to talk to that guy. Because back then, if you think about it, 5 years back, it's very difficult, for example, to figure this guy out, not like today, right? The world has changed. Technology like data services, all these powerful search and tools like ours, go back to my previous theoretical argument with the CMO that all I need is one or little two pieces of information. Over time, I can build it out into that rest of the information that Eric's talking about that everybody wants, that full profile. So a lot of data people either choose to ignore or just don't know what to do with that they're sitting on is actually incomplete lead information. They may have gotten through some trade show with just a Gmail address, right? That, if you're willing to invest time in technology to develop that out, you can actually grow that. And today, technology exists to do that. So if you're still going by the old thinking that we will only focus on quality leads, think again. Maybe now, because all the technology available, services available, just my advice is grab any lead you can through any channel you can. Doesn't matter how little information it contains. Because once you have that, you always have the opportunity to grow it out and build up the top of your funnel. Whereas if you don't have it, you just don't have it. There's nothing you can do about it.
And you see that a lot, Ed. You see companies that have boiled down to one or two things is all they ask because they want to make the lead gen as easy as possible. Like, all I want is an email address. You can download the asset.
Right.
But for a lot of companies, they're not. And this is probably a great point for everybody who's watching to kind of take away from this is one single piece of data with the right data partner, the right data hygiene, the right data management service can actually take that one piece of data and turn that into a complete customer. By figuring out whose Gmail account that is, you might be able to get a data services company to tell you 28 more things about that person rather than trying to do a automation program where you get them to come back and download another thing and get them to come back and download another thing just to try to fill in 2, 3, 4, 5 things. I don't think a lot of companies consider the fact of path of least resistance. Get the lowest common denominator of data, and then instead of investing more in the demand gen program, invest in the data services to take that little bit of data you have and fill it in for you, and then spend more money on that and then collecting a larger number of interested potential leads.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your question, Dan, back in my experience, the last probably 3 companies I've worked at, the data I think that was very valuable or interesting to us was not necessarily with prospects, but with customers and what they were doing inside the online community, on our website, inside some of the webinars that we would do, and trying to take a closer look at what they're doing because they're almost screaming out, hey, like, sell me more, help me, take care of me. And unfortunately, at times we weren't paying attention to it as closely as we could have. Nowadays, with marketing automation, it's very easy to do it, or it's much easier. But we did a lot of manual watching across some of the different platforms back when a lot of them weren't integrated. But that's a quick answer to your question earlier.
But Brian, what about the data you have and the customers you already have? Brian, I mean, you like to talk about community and customer. Are we using the data with the current customers we have to actually target them very well? How's that going? Because I think that's a big miss. It's life cycle marketing.
Right, or even the data that we're gathering, what our ultimate goal is initially. I think oftentimes we're getting an email address and we're putting in the same list or data warehouse as someone that is a lead. And if maybe that email address, they downloaded that, maybe that person's the education person that we need to push all of the marketing efforts towards these certain leads to educate them so they become our advocates, not because they're never going to be a decision maker. But I think oftentimes we take and we put the decision maker poll with the same poll as those that are downloading that can become our advocates. So for me, I think part of this conversation also comes down to, when you're asking for something, what is your ultimate goal for that ask? And then what is that person that's gonna, what's the target? If your target audience is downloading that ebook, is going to go take the information and put it into action, probably not going to end up buying the product at the end. I still think they have value, but I think putting them all in one bucket and then your metrics like, okay, we didn't get anybody to click through to make this purchase for this small ask. Well, it's probably because 50% of that audience are ones that can become your advocates if you only focused on providing them educational assets rather than pushing them towards the actual, right hook or the sell. And I think that includes, like, for me, one of the big things was I do a lot of stuff at events. And you see people scanning badges, right, and getting all the information they get from scanning badges. But the same person that's scanning a badge maybe that is different than the person that's attending your keynote speech. And you get all of the leads from everybody who attended your keynote. I think you segmenting those two as two different types of consumers and leads is important. I think oftentimes, especially the businesses that I've worked with, they dump that all in the same thing and pummel them with the same email marketing, which ultimately, in my mind, ends to an unsubscribe rate high on both sides, because you're pushing education material to the decision maker when the decision maker says, give me shit I want. And you're pushing, sales data to the education ones, which says, I just want to know enough about your stuff to talk about it, as a thought leader. I think that, to me, is one of the touch buttons.
Yeah, and kind of to add to what Eric said a little earlier about, don't underestimate the customer data you have. One thing we see people don't do nearly enough is actually understanding who their customers are, right? People do spend all this analytics effort on their pipeline and their leads. And if you ask them, who's your ideal customer, right? What's their ideal customer profile? The answer I always hear is that it's basically based on interviewing our sales team, right? Very few companies actually have that backup with hard data. So if you actually go through the effort to segment and profile your customer database, and then use the analytics capability to actually draw a full profile of who exactly are the customer that most likely will buy my product, what industry they're in, how big are they, how mature they are, who are the decision makers, who owns the budget. And that information alone can actually help you do a much better job at creating target account lists and be able to kind of put more thoughts into building your pipeline. We don't see people do nearly enough that. It kind of has the marketing, I guess, a lot of times has this attitude that once they become a customer, it's not my business anymore.
Yeah, I like some of the comments that I'm reading. I'm going back here to, was it Ross talking about getting run over by the marketing car? That was a good one. Well, hey guys, why don't we go ahead and wrap this up? We'll stay on for a little bit more for Q&A. But first of all, I just wanted to thank you, Ed,
thank you
for joining us and sharing some insight. Because, like Dan said, I mean, this is not sexy, but it's valuable and it's important. And I think you shared some great knowledge and tips with us. So thank you for sharing some time with us.
That's it for this episode of Marketing Mash. You can share your thoughts by following us on Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe to our podcast to keep up with the show. And of course, you can always find us by visiting themarketingscope.com.